Okay. Okay, all right. So again, now we are live on Facebook, and thanks to everyone for attending this particular workshop. We welcome all the participants of this workshop, and then our speakers. You are all welcome to this exciting workshop. I can't believe how excited I am, and I've been waiting for this workshop for so long of a time, and finally it's here with us. So just to introduce myself, I will be the chair for this particular workshop, and then I'll be moderating this particular workshop alongside with the help of Zara Tamasebi and then Dr. Ashina McElligott. So Dr. Ashina and then Zara, thank you very much for helping to actually moderate this workshop. So just to give you a brief introduction about myself, I am assistant professor in the Department of Public Health at California State University, Fullerton. My research interest is actually data-driven and interdisciplinary, focused on statistical and analytical modeling and application of quantitative and qualitative statistical and machine learning methods and algorithms. I am actually a statistician and a research consultant. I collaborate with the National Institute of Health as a freelance data analyst, researching in cancer outcomes, disparities, and immigration health. So again, thank you very much. So just before we proceed, I would like to actually acknowledge some of the sponsors of this particular workshop, without whom this workshop wouldn't have been very successful. So this workshop is actually co-sponsored by the Cal State University Fullerton Undergraduate Research Opportunity Center, which is in short called the UROC, and then also the Department of Public Health here in Cal State Fullerton. And it's a collaborative workshop with Cal State Fullerton and external institutions, which include the National Institute of Health and San Jose State University. So again, thank you very much, the partners and sponsors of this workshop, especially UROC, for the immense support for bringing this particular workshop to fruition. So just to give you a little highlight on this workshop is actually about research method and manuscript preparation. So this workshop is going to be This workshop is actually going to be in two different parts. So the first part, we are going to have the preparing for conducting research studies. So how do you prepare to conduct a research study? And then the second part is actually going to be how to write the report or the manuscript. So these are the two parts of the workshop. So without actually delaying much time, I wouldn't introduce our speakers, which is our wonderful, awesome speakers. I wouldn't introduce them at a go. I will introduce them one after the other as and when we invite them to give their talk. So the first speaker whom I will be introducing for this first section of the workshop, which is on preparing for conducting research studies, will be Dr. Michelle Wood. So just to give you a brief introduction about Dr. Michelle Wood, who is actually my department chair and the supervisor, a great personality and a leader whom I actually look up into and then inspires me a lot. So Dr. Michelle is actually the department chair of the Department of Public Health here in California State University, Fullerton. Her research interests include preparedness, messaging and risk communication for disaster, HIV/AIDS among high-risk populations, and program evaluation. She has served as a subject matter expert and advisor for USGS and then FEMA for the Southern California Earthquake Center. Then in the US Fire Service Administration, she has helped lead early research on nation earthquake early warnings systems, and is currently serving as the principal investigator on earthquake early warning research funded by the USGS. So without wasting much time, Dr. Michelle, you are very welcome, and the platform is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mamudu. And hello, greetings to everyone. Can I share screens? I'm gonna try to do the, it's gonna work just fine. And, I'm super happy to be here. I am a department chair, so I don't get to interact with students as much as I like to. So this is a treat for me. And when I was teaching, I used to teach, guess what? Research methods, statistics, and I also taught program design and evaluation, which is a natural outgrowth of research methods because we use research to inform the programs we develop and how we test them. So I love this topic very, very much. I used to study HIV, substance use, and homeless, and I got lured into disaster research. So I might give you a couple of examples. So I wanted to tell you about the moment I became, the moment I became engaged and excited about research, okay? The year was 1985, okay? I was at UCI as an undergrad in a psych class taught by Isabel Birnbaum, and she assigned this book. And it was written in 1960, right? It's older than I am. And it looked kind of boring and dry. And I read this, I started reading this book because as a student, I read every page ever assigned to me. And I read the book and suddenly I fell into it and became so excited. I remember sitting in the doctor's office and because I had an appointment, I could not put the book down. And what excited me about the book is it revealed to me how bias influences the things we conclude to be true, and how research is a tool we can use to reduce and try to eliminate that bias. And in fact, it helps us get to the truth. And we can use that truth to make the world a better place. So I got very, very excited. The other thing about this book that set my mind on fire was the realization that in many areas of research, particularly in the natural sciences, when there have been big, stubborn problems we haven't been able to solve, oftentimes the person who comes in and solves the problem is from outside the discipline. And that intrigued me. Why is that the case? It's because we get so invested in our way of seeing the world that sometimes it's hard to challenge our own thinking and to consider that we might be wrong. People outside the discipline are a little more able to do that. So anyway, this book set me up and got me interested and excited about research. This is Zora Neale Hurston. She was a wonderful writer, filmmaker, and an anthropologist. And she described research as formalized curiosity. It's poking and prying with a purpose. So trying to learn something, a systematic way of discovering things. I like this definition. Here's a kind of more formal, like this is something you might see in a textbook. It's a systematic investigation that involves gathering and analyzing data and interpreting it to create new knowledge. This is the thing that excites me about research, is this idea of discovery and being part of creating new knowledge. So I had never imagined that's something I could do, that I could participate in that. And so that's what got me excited about research. And there are three basic core activities in research. There's more than this, but these are the three core activities. Collecting data, and I'm going to share some of the ways we collect data in a minute. Analyzing the data. You might do that with statistics, with qualitative content analysis, other methods, and then taking those findings and writing a report and sharing your findings, your interpretation with others so that the knowledge can grow. So other people can take advantage of what you've learned and go forward in the research literature. So these are some ways we can collect data. It's not an exhaustive list. I can't give you a whole methods class in 15 minutes as much as I'd like to. So sometimes we conduct experiments. I've conducted experiments on the best way to send an earthquake early warning alert to motivate people to protect themselves in the few seconds they have before an earthquake strikes. Sometimes we do surveys of people or documents or events. And I did a survey, my last survey I did was on how members of the public, how much they trust the USGS and Shake Alert and earthquake early warning following a false alert for the Ridgecrest earthquake. We do focus groups to learn about how people process and think about and experience the world. I've done focus groups with emergency managers, with drug users, sex workers, homeless people, people with HIV, various, if we're trying to learn about problems we face, bring people in, have a discussion, and discover their insights, learn how they experience the health issue or the problem, the thing you're studying. In-depth interviews, we've done in-depth interviews with heroin users who are homeless to learn about their lives and their drug treatment experiences. Sometimes we collect data through observation. This could be ethnographies where we live with a group of people. I've worked with ethnographers who have studied how people share drugs, heroin mostly, and the risk that can inadvertently create, how the way people share drugs can lead to HIV transmission. There's lots of uses for observation, sometimes public observation of behavior. Some disciplines use simulation. Econometrics uses simulation. Economists, economic research uses simulation. And then document review. Looking at medical records and outcomes, reviewing government records. I'm looking at website visits, how people engage with different online interventions or products. All that, those are examples of different ways we collect data. So I said there are three main steps. Here's the larger picture, okay? I think of research as a wheel. It's an ongoing process, a cycle. It usually starts when we observe something in the world, a pattern. And that leads us to questions. Usually that's sparked by our own curiosity. And from that, we develop a hypothesis, an idea about why things work the way they do. And from that hypothesis, we try to predict outcomes. If we change this, what's going to happen? If we change it this way, what's going to happen? And then we develop a method to test those hypotheses. We collect our data. We might refine the hypothesis and collect more data, but then from our findings, we create theories about how the world works, how people behave. And based on those theories and findings, that starts the next cycle through and builds on the next set of questions we ask. This is the larger picture of the scientific method as part of this ongoing process. So the word research really comes from French, rechercher, meaning to search and search again, because we're never done. We're always building on research. So when we look at our findings and what they mean, our very next step is, what are the implications? What does this tell us? What are our next question? Where does this finding lead us? So let's see if I can. Okay, here's a quote. In science, the primary duty of ideas is to be useful and interesting, even more than to be true. Well, this sort of hints at the idea that our findings should be, our research should contribute to the public good. But a question this raises for me is, who defines what is interesting and what is true? I think that's an important question. So in 2001, I was taking a sociology class taught by Walter Allen at UCLA, and I read this book. Patricia Hill Collins is a former president of the American Sociological Association, brilliant scholar. And when I read this, my head started tingling with excitement, because this book talks about the process of acquiring knowledge and how that is embedded in a power structure, and how our search for using research to inform and guide social justice means that we participate in the power structure as we challenge it, and that words that are generated from research have power and meaning, and that we need to recognize and be aware of the power. The questions we ask limit what we can learn. The way we collect the data limits and defines what we can discover. So once I read this book, I got even more excited about research and more passionate about being able to participate in the process of collecting and generating new information. So I'm going to end with this quote by Marie Curie, who was a physicist and a chemist and brilliant, and who won multiple Nobel Prizes. Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. And, we have a lot of challenges in our worlds around COVID, around homelessness, around, we could go on and generate a huge list about problems that we care about. And research is a way we can contribute to learning more, understanding more, and changing the conditions in which we live. So with that, I will say that was a little appetizer for what research is about. And I hope you have a very wonderful day. I'm going to return to a Senate retreat that I'm actually participating in today. So it was very wonderful to see you. And I wish you the best event, and look forward to seeing the research you participate in.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michelle, for such a great presentation on how one can actually initiate a research, how one can initiate a research work, or what scientific research is about. So now we move on to our second speaker for today, and that is going to be Dr. McElligott Ashina. Now, guess what? She is also a professor of public health here in California State University, Fullerton. And then she is actually the director of the Cal State Fullerton Undergraduate Research Opportunity Center, which is UROC, which is actually sponsoring this particular workshop. So again, we cannot be thankful enough to what UROC have done. So Dr. Ashina is also a PI or program director for multi-year NIH-funded training program entitled the Neurocognitive Aging Analytic and Research Education, which is NEAR. Majority of Dr. McElligott's teaching, research, and administrative goals have focused on identifying and reducing health and educational disparities, with subsequent goal to promote inclusive diversity and improve equity gap for underrepresented, at-risk, and disadvantaged communities. Dr. McElligott's primary research interests include investigating identifiable risk factors in relation to disease outcomes and health disparities. I must also emphasize that she is also my research collaborator. So in so many different areas. So without wasting time, we welcome Dr. McElligott Ashina to give us the talk. And she's going to give us 15 minutes talk on how to initiate a research study. Yes. Dr. Ashina, the platform is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mahmood.
We greatly appreciate this opportunity. I think this is so exciting and thrilling to have the number of participants that we have. And I think it's going to make for an incredible workshop today. And it's a great opportunity to share our perspectives. And what's so great is that I think we'll all have slightly different perspectives on how to do research, because we're all researchers and we conduct studies in different areas. So there's definitely different perspectives and different avenues for beginning and initiating a study. So I'll go ahead and share my slide right now. So everyone can kind of see the slides right now. Great. So, so as I had said, I want to thank Dr. Lahua and of course the Public Health Department, Dr. Wood. I'd very much like to thank her for their collaboration with the inaugural. We have a new center on campus, the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Center. These centers are an incredible opportunity for our students and our faculty. We are really a service organization providing service to our students and to our faculty opportunities to present research. And so once again, this is a great collaborative opportunity together. And so today, what I'm going to be discussing is how do you initiate a research study? This in itself, to initiate a research study, can take many lectures. It could even take a mini course, a mini symposium, but I'm going to cover it in 15 minutes. So let's get going on this area. So how do you conduct a research study? Well, these are the overall steps and topics I'll be covering today with you. So we'll be reviewing choosing a topic. And after you choose a topic, identifying a gap, formulating a research question, developing a design and methods, and I'll briefly cover collecting data and analyzing synthesis. So I'd really like to thank Dr. Wood for giving us this beautiful overall perspective on research and what is research. And now we're going to get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty, just to provide you with some good tips, good direction on how do you actually do this. And it's complicated, it's not easy. And so let's get into just talking about, and we'll be touching base on some of these things. So what is choosing a topic? This is very complicated. Many students, many scientists, researchers, academicians struggle with this. How do you choose a topic? And the one thing that you really have to look for is intrinsic motivation. That what is it that's inside you that you are most passionate about? So choosing a topic is the question of the century. And it can be really challenging, as I had said. So first, you can choose based on intrinsic motivation. And at times, this is one of the best drivers on selecting a topic. For example, think of things that give you energy and that give you passion. What are you passionate about? So on the right, I have a few images of things that I'm passionate about. For example, traveling is a huge passion of mine. I've always been inquisitive, always wanted to ask questions as little as I can remember. I always was inquisitive about asking questions. So you want to let that be your guide, that energy, that passion of what gives you passion. Other aspects to consider are personal family experiences. So for example, I come from a rich history of cooking. As you can see, I have an image of Indian food, cooking, culture. So that to me was a really big guiding light in deciding whether I wanted to enter the field of nutritional epidemiology. And I'd always been drawn to nutrition, and that really is based on my previous personal experience. And then for others, many students I've talked to, they've had a family history of a disease in their family. So for example, they may have had diabetes, they may have had Alzheimer's disease or heart disease. And so this is a big draw on which particular broader topic for them to select. And then ultimately, as I said, that you will have to search your heart. What are you drawn to? What are the things that you continually keep going back to? So as I said, initially I was interested in the sciences. That was always a draw to me. I had done a lot of laboratory-based sciences. I'd been in a laboratory learning how to actually do assays, learning how to do different types of assays, learning how to collect data in a laboratory setting. But once I found out that I could actually do research in populations and people, that really drew me into public health. So once again, you know, as I said, that it looked for some of these intrinsic motivations. And then the other thing is, in addition to intrinsic motivation, it's really important for you to look at extrinsic factors. So there's other outside factors that can help you in terms of doing studies. So since we've discussed intrinsic motivation, but other factors, for example, you may want to do, and actually for many students at Cal State Fullerton, you really don't have to search far. We have incredible ongoing research, incredible ongoing programs. And here's just one, the Neurocognitive Aging and Analytics Research Education program that we have on campus. This is actually in partnership with the mathematics department, with Dr. Sam Basetta and Dr. Math Kohonko in the biology department, and we partner with USC. So look for these programs, see what's out there, reach out to the coordinators, ask them what this program is about. The other things that, and we have the MARC program, this is just one program. We have at least 10 programs on campus that you can become involved with. Others as well is you can attend workshops. So for example, you're attending this workshop. It's a great way to interact with faculty, to know what's going on. So that's a great way to find out what research topics might be good for you. And of course, external institutions now with the internet and the web, there's so many different institutions that are out there. And so look for workshops on Coursera. You can look for workshops that other universities are offering as well. But saying this, I know that there's a lot of information, too much information out there. And so another avenue is just talk to your professor. Talk to a professor, talk to a faculty member, go to their office hours and ask them, can you tell me about your research? How did you get interested in it? And so this will actually help you hone in on that research topic, all right? So after you're choosing a research topic, the other main thing is to initiate a study, is to identify a gap in the field. So let's say that you have a broader area that you're interested in looking at. Let's say that you're interested in looking at biomarkers, and it even could be dietary biomarkers and their relationship to cancer risk. So after you start with this topic, you want to hone it a little bit further, narrow it a little bit more, then you can begin your literature review. We're going to be talking about that in the next session, but I do want to touch on it because this is part of initiating a research study. So the critical aspect of beginning that literature review is that one important thing to remember about literature reviews is the word time. They take time, they take dedication. And so it may take hours, it may even take days. So you do want to sit tight, hang tight, and actually start doing the literature review and carve out a decent amount of time. The other thing that's really important is that you want to look at the scope of the review. For example, how many research studies are there? Do you need that you need to look at? How comprehensive should it be? How many years should you look over? This, I know, is a daunting task, but if you just start looking, you will be able to clear the noise from what you really need to look at. Because there is a lot of noise. I mean, there's on one article, you could type in cancer and biomarkers, you'll come up with thousands of studies. So the way you could reduce the noise is to look for landmark studies. So which studies came first? Which studies came first? The other is review studies or a meta-analysis. Those can be a really good guide to see, okay, what are key manuscripts in this area? And then the other is that you can look at is definitely your faculty mentors. Go to them, ask them that you're interested in it, and they can direct you to certain manuscripts and published papers that are already out there that can guide you on identifying this gap. And then you want to conduct your search. You want to find the literature, and of course, keeping track of your searches is really important. And I'm sure there's some really nifty ways that we're going to talk about this in the next session about keeping track of your searches. So in finding the gap, it's like, what is the gap? There could be a really big gap, and some really important clues that you can look at is, okay, does the data look at differences in ethnic groups? Do they look at differences in age? Do they look at differences in gender? So finding this gap is going to help you with your hypothesis and developing your hypothesis or research question. So you can say, okay, are younger females, is there a different exposure for them? Do they react differently? Do they have a different risk factor? Do older adults, is there a difference in, let's say, memory for older women versus men? So you can look to see, okay, this is how you actually find the gap. And the other way is, of course, biological pathways, mechanisms, upregulation. And so you, in order to find the gap, you'd have to be very familiar with these pathways. What is involved with these pathways? What actually is the mechanism behind for this molecule? And what are the factors that upregulate it or control it? And so that way you can find the gap in the literature to help you with the next step. And the next step really is to formulate a research question. And this is one of also a pretty challenging thing for students, but I really think let the literature and the gap serve you and serve you well. So what you want to do is you actually want to discuss this with your faculty mentor. That would be a really good guide, that this is what I'm considering. I'm considering looking at blood pressure for Hispanic women, and what are the factors that change blood pressure for Hispanic women. Or I'm interested in looking at memory in older adults, and specifically in this group. So, or you're interested in looking at upregulating a certain protein and how is it upregulated. So if you discuss these factors with with your mentor, that can guide you in narrowing your research question. Now, the second point is really important. In a research question that you're doing, you don't have to save the world. That's really important to remember, that you don't have to say, I'm going to solve cancer. I mean, there's thousands of scientists all over the world working on this. And so you really want to say, is it manageable? Can I manage this question? One, you want to see what's your timeline? When are you going to be able to finish this project? And so if you only have 6 months, it really needs to be manageable. And so if you have 2 years too, that still needs to be manageable. So that's really important to remember, and not to make it too broad and not to make it too narrow is important. And then the other aspect that's important is that, has this been overdone? So for example, if you say, I want to look at exercise and obesity in children, that's been done a lot. So you want to have a more of a nuanced question that you can ask. Well, has it been looked in this specific age group or in this specific ethnicity? So you do want to see, has it been overdone? And you really do want to go back to the literature. I think I only have a few more minutes, so I'll keep going though. So once you formulate your research question, these are the steps to do it. And of course, there's multiple other things that you can do, but these are the primary steps. And then creating a design. I won't spend too much time on this. Once again, I spend lectures in my epidemiology course on this, on design and what is study design. So, and Dr. Wood covered this somewhat too, that how do you create a design? And, you know, it comes with a question, but actually there's very methodological ways of developing a study design. When you're doing a study design in a population, this is the general sequence that you would use. And many times study designs begin with clinical observation. So physicians, they're in the hospital, and then they observe something in their patients. And so that actually is a big factor in developing studies and study designs. So the clinical observations, then you look at what's the available data. This is very nuanced. You know, there's a lot of things, and I know that we'll probably cover it in the following lectures as well. But the clinical observations, and then And, and I want to make a note that this is for population-based research study in a laboratory setting. And when you're doing climate science, there's different ways of collecting data. Obviously, in a laboratory study, you're going to be doing it through your assays that you're working on. But once you do that, you can still set up case control studies. So cases are those with a particular disease that you're interested in, controls or without the disease. There's cohort studies where you follow groups of people in time. And so, I use the word time loosely, but you follow those individuals to see whether disease occurs. So case control studies begins with people who already have the disease compared to people who don't have the disease, where a cohort study begins with individuals without disease and they're exposed to something, let's say smoking, and you follow them to see whether they got lung cancer. And then, of course, there's randomized clinical trials where we've heard a plethora of information about now with what's been happening. So where you actually intervene and you do some sort of intervention, whether that be a drug or a physical activity or a diet in a group of people compared to a group of people who aren't quote unquote receive the experiment. So that's very broad. And as I said, there's many lectures. We actually have a very nice video that we did for the NAIR program that I'd be happy to share with everyone. And then maybe Zara, you could put that in our chat, that link to the research methods video. So you can look at it further. And I know we're going to be talking about this too, some more. And then just the last few things, let's see. Oh, I don't know why we're not advancing, but the last few things, these are major steps. You would collect your data, right? We could have lectures on that as well. Then you do the data analysis and data synthesis, and then of course the reporting of it. So with that, I think I'm actually pretty good on time. And so with that, I just like to say thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm really, as I said, really delighted that the CSUF with UROC and the Public Health Department is providing this opportunity to engage and learn more about research. So I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ashina, for such an insightful presentation on how to actually initiate a research study, which is, I think you've handled everything very well, and thank you very much. So now we move on to our next speaker, who is actually going to tell us about what database can you actually obtain all those information Dr. Michelle, Dr. Ashina were talking about. How do you actually start your search in terms of getting information to actually start your research work, just as Dr. Ashina emphasized. So I'm calling on Mr. Cotton Coslet, who is also an online librarian, online learning librarian at the Pollack Library here in Cal State Fullerton. And his subject liaison areas include nursing, public health, and he has been a health librarian for over 10 years. So Mr. Cotton Coslet will be actually giving us a 10-minute talk on what database can you obtain information for your research study. So Mr. Cotton Coslet, we welcome you and the platform is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoudou. So as mentioned, I am the public health and nursing librarian here at Cal State Fullerton, and I'm very honored and appreciative to be here to be able to speak with all of you today. I'm going to focus my talk today more on search strategies rather than research strategies, because this is a very, very broad topic, as you can imagine. I'm used to having, spending hours talking about this. So I'm going to try to focus a little bit on searching rather than researching. However, it's fantastic to hear Dr. Wood mentioning the research as a process, which is absolutely something I try to remind people. And Dr. McElligott describing how to keep track of your research, which is vital sometimes because of the way these different databases and resources act. So with that said, I'm just going to kind of briefly run into these things a little bit. Bear with me. So the overall question, which databases can information be obtained from, is kind of a misleading or a red herring, because in short, any database will give you information. Even when you focus on relevant information, there's really no shortage of different places to look. As a public health librarian, one of the things that I often tell my students that I'm working with is public health research, it can be a lot more challenging than some other disciplines, because there's no single database. There's no single discipline where you're going to focus. Your research might bump into medical research or psychological research or sociological research or political science. There's so many different subject areas in which you might find yourself leaning into, which makes it extremely interesting for me, but it also means you should never rely strictly on one database, because there's no such thing as a perfect database. Even in the more standard disciplines, there's still, a variety of databases to consider. So for me, thinking about, say, a subject like teen pregnancy, which can kind of, again, appear in a lot of different areas, I might first think to look in the medical databases, something like PubMed and CINAHL, which are going to focus on the actual medical aspects of this, both for the parents and the child. Then there's the mental health aspect of this, which I would look into APA PsycInfo, the educational ramifications for both the parents and the child involved, or maybe gender parity or ethnic parity. All of these have their own specific databases, the economic ramifications of this specific topic and how perhaps legislation might affect these things. This is just a kind of a handful of databases on one topic, and I could probably think of 5 or 6 more quite easily. So a lot of this falls into what aspects of this you're looking to research and informed by which disciplines. The other thing to think about is that many of our library databases are focused on obtaining articles, and specifically research articles and peer-reviewed journal articles. However, that overlooks a huge pool of resources that can be immensely helpful. Things that actually Dr. Wood mentioned earlier, like data sets, gray literature, and government reports are all phenomenal places to get information, especially relevant information. The interesting part about most of these is that they're all available on the open web. So it's that time where I'm saying, no, use Google, you want to try that. And suddenly that actually will open up new sources. They're not going to be the sort of peer-reviewed, finalized sources that we're thinking about, but more data sources and pools of information to look through. So when it comes to which database is the best, as I mentioned, there's no such thing as sort of a perfect database. Each database operates very differently depending on their subject, depending on who makes the database. Sometimes with several databases made by the same company operate very differently. All of them also use different tools to sort this data. This is a screenshot of a database called APA PsycInfo. It is our mental health and psychiatry database. And it is fascinating because it is the only database that I know of that we have here at Cal State Fullerton that allows you to search by a methodology. So we can see things like meta-analysis and metasynthesis and qualitative and quantitative studies and longitudinal and retrospective, and that's wonderful. It's a really handy tool. It's also extremely frustrating that it's only available in one database and none of the others. That alone is a source of frustration. Another thing we might see is that there's no mixed method in here in this. This is sorted alphabetically, so it would be in there. And I'll get to that a little bit later. You might also see that in the background, it's kind of blurred out, but there's an option to search for tests and measures, which is another immensely helpful tool that is only available here in APA PsycInfo. This is my way of saying that most of these databases don't have these explicit options for searching and identifying methodologies or types of research. The one exception is that almost all of the databases allow you to search for empirical research as opposed to review articles. So I am going to revise this subject a little bit to consider using databases to search for specific types of information. And when doing that, one of the better methods to use is going to be subject headings. Now, if you're used to using any of the databases, usually you can kind of run a search and on the one side, you'll be able to see, oh, here's the list of subjects here. And those are the subject headings that I'm referring to. And these are assigned to every article in these databases by researchers, by editors, by librarians, by experts. And the important part about this is that it's a controlled vocabulary. And that means that it doesn't matter if I search for skin cancer or cancer of the skin or skin neoplasms, it's not going to matter. It's going to bring back all of those, because instead of worrying about the actual words to describe this, I'm thinking about the topics and the concepts involved. And that makes searching much easier when you don't have to think about which specific language to use. The drawback to these is that there's a huge amount of variation amongst subject headings within all of these databases. And here's an example. I picked 6 of the databases I just mentioned earlier, and I searched for the Native American population. And I wanted to see which subject headings would be applied. And as we can see here, this is 6 different databases, and each one of them uses a completely different subject heading here, which is my way of saying you can't really just cut and paste your search in one database across to others every time and expect it to yield the same results or to yield efficient results. What's even more interesting is that of these databases, CINAHL, APA PsycInfo, and ERIC are all made by the same company. So it's not necessarily the subject matter sometimes, or it's not necessarily the maker of the databases. Sometimes it's a subject matter which might use these slightly different when referring to subjects. Another way to use these subject headings is to consider the type of research being conducted. Many of them do have relevant subject headings like qualitative studies. And we'll get to those in a little bit. I want to break down by qualitative and quantitative, but I also want to address keyword searching. Now, keyword searching is a little bit different than the subject headings. That's going to be when you go in and enter a word and hit search. And that's by far the most common type of searching, but it's also one of the least efficient, because the default setting on nearly every database is to search the entire body of an article or a book for one instance of any of the keywords that you're using. So you might find, hey, this is a great result, but it only mentions your keywords once each, and it's at the very end or in the reference list, which means it's not going to be as relevant. Sometimes, if possible, you might find it more effective to search instead in the titles of these articles, or much better in the abstracts of these articles, which can be a lot more efficient and a lot more effective in locating relevant research. When using keywords, it's helpful to consider the gathering methods used for these various types of research, or specific analyses that would be applied. And so when looking, say, for quantitative information, you might consider the subject headings. And we can see right here at the top, CINAHL and PubMed, the 2 medical databases, one uses quantitative studies and one uses quantitative research, which doesn't seem like a big difference, and it's not. But when you're using the subject headings, that can actually matter quite a bit. We also see related terms like regression analysis, variance, and analysis variance, ANOVA, which can be useful. Sometimes, though, as I mentioned, we can't quite use the subject headings, and we have to rely on keyword searching. And as we can see here, there's a few other options, something like a t-test. We might consider concepts associated with quantitative research, like variance, correlation, statistical analysis. There's also clinical trials and RCTs down there. Now, those aren't exclusively quantitative by any means. More and more frequently, we're finding qualitative data or research is being applied to clinical trials and RCTs. However, most of the time, you're still getting back a lot of quantitative research as well. When looking at qualitative research, it's very similar as far as the subject headings. We see, again, qualitative studies and qualitative research and some methods there which can be useful. But once again, when we're looking for the keyword searching, it's really helpful to consider how this stuff might be gathered. Interviews, focus groups, case studies, observation, as well as related concepts, which generally are applied to qualitative research, such as attitudes, beliefs, perceptions. Again, using the variety of these terms can yield a number of results. Now, I mentioned the methodology format that we had in that APA PsycInfo, which was so cool, but it did not include mixed methods information. And that is actually kind of an ongoing issue with most of these databases, because although mixed methods research is becoming more and more prevalent, it's still not being addressed correctly in a lot of these databases. Now, there are subject headings in some, such as multi-method studies and triangulation found in CINAHL, but they're not perfectly effective either. And a lot of times you might find that mixed method studies are mislabeled. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Obviously, you always want to read the method section to be sure you're getting what you're looking for. When using keywords, though, those terms can be applied pretty readily. Mixed method and multi-method or triangulation can be used kind of across those as well. Now, the final thing I'll say is that there's a lot of nuance to all these, as I've discussed, and there's a lot of different ways these can go. So it might be a little self-serving, but I would also suggest never hesitate to reach out to a librarian, especially in your subject matter, because they can often provide you a little bit of an explanation of some of these resources and some of the tips and tricks to using them. So I think that's all I have, but I want to just thank everyone for their time and thank the Department of Public Health and UROC as well for allowing me to come in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cotton Coslet. I mean, who I actually did one workshop with last spring semester. I mean, he's also a great personality. So thank you very much. So
Thank you.
We are now done with the first section of this workshop. The second section is actually going to emphasize on how to write your report or your manuscript. So before we start the second section, I think we will need to have a 10 minutes break, and then we will be back in about, let's say 12:03 to proceed to the second section of the workshop. Thank you very much. But those of you who will be staying here with me, I would want us to play some game so that we have some fun on the platform whilst we wait to start the second section of the workshop. So let's see what game am I talking of. So we'll all be back at 12:03 to start the second section. So let me share my screen. So before then, please can you put in the chat where you are joining this workshop from which country, from which state, from which city. I mean, you can go ahead and put in the chat. Let's have some fun. Okay. Oh, Chicago, Fullerton, Brazil, wow. Oh, Ghana, Nigeria, oh, North Korea. Okay, Ghana, Nigeria, Los Angeles, Ghana. Oh, awesome. So let's have some more fun. Let me share my screen. Okay, so let's play some ice breaker game over here. So first of all, I want to ask you this question. What do you do to release stress? Please, can you put it in the chat so that someone else can learn from you what you actually do to release stress? Because we work a lot, we tend to be very stressful. And so sometime after a whole day work, you would want to release some stress. So why not? Oh, sleep. Okay, so music, gym, read book, running, listening to music, sleeping, game. Myself, I play soccer anyway. I love to play soccer. Every Friday, I go out in the evening to play soccer, maybe for about 2 hours. It is great. Yeah, so I think trying to release stress help you in terms of your mental health and others. So let's continue to participate in activities that help us to release stress. So now let us look at more icebreaker questions. Okay, what sound or noise do you love? What sound or noise? Okay, rains, birds, waves, rain, rain, rain. Oh, ocean waves, rain. Oh, that's nice. Instrumental music, pianos, laughter, waves, rain, musical music, classical music. I love reggae. I used to listen to reggae a lot. Yeah, the baby laugh. Oh, okay. And I actually love to listen to the sound from my little boy. Okay, so awesome. Now let's look at more. Okay, so what skill or talent would you love to have? Oh, there you go. Oh, someone said memory, country. I wish I could play a piano. Oh, okay, there you go. Sing, tennis, reading. Oh, photographic memory, motivate people. Oh, awesome. Yeah. Speaking more, 3 more languages. Wow. I also wish I am able to speak maybe 10 languages, or maybe speak the language of everyone on the platform. That would have been nice. Okay, so let's look at some more icebreaker questions. And there you go. What's the greatest challenge you overcame? Can you tell us the greatest challenge you felt you once overcame? Self-motivation, data analysis, waking up for school today, learning how to speak English, postpartum, wow, staying college, being a mom of 2, wow, being more outgoing. Okay, yeah, that's nice. And myself not feeling too much shy. You know, I used to feel shy a lot. So I think it's something I have tried to overcome, or maybe in that process. I mean, that's nice. So let's look at some more, the public presentation, gaining confidence. That's nice. Let's look at more. How do you imagine your dream house? There you go. You know, when you were young, you want to build a house, right? How do you imagine that dream house? Oh, oh my God, big land, lots of, okay, somewhat quiet, definitely a tree house, mansion, 5 cats, 2-story farm. Oh, awesome. Oh, wow. I'm learning a lot from here. So maybe my future house, I can actually put up something like that. Oh, a lot of land with a lot of what? Okay, green. Wow, that's nice. Water resort in my backyard. Oh, there you go. Oh, you know, I would like to have a house in which like there's a river beneath me. Can you imagine that? Okay, so let's look at more. Then, would you rather only eat pizza or chocolate cake for the rest of your life? Oh, okay. Someone said pizza, pizza, pizza. Oh, pizza is dominating. I can imagine a lot of you are voting for pizza. Oh, chocolate cake. Pizza, pizza. Oh, that's nice. I'm sure a lot of folks are fan of pizza. I actually also love pizza. But maybe I'll be skewing towards chocolate cake, perhaps, but not too sure anyways. Then also, let's look at more on that. Would you rather go to the streets in slippers or swim in ice cold water? Okay. Okay, street slippers, slippers, swim in ice cold water. Oh, slippers, slippers. Oh, wear slippers. Okay, swim in ice cold, cool water. Oh, nice, beautiful. Now let's look at more. Which historical figure would you like to have dinner with? Which historical figure? Lincoln? Which of the Lincoln? Is it Abraham Lincoln? So, which historic? Oh, Queen Elizabeth. Oh, there you go. Which historical figure would you like to have dinner with? Oh, Barack Obama, George Washington, okay, Alexander Hamilton, oh, Kwame Nkrumah, and that's the founder of Democracy of Ghana, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Oh, wow. Okay, so I think maybe we have one last more. Let's see. Oh, what is your favorite quotation? One of my favorite quotation is never say never. You know, that's one of my favorite quotation. What is your favorite quotation? And I also like always be positive, you know, even during the period of challenges, always maintain positive mindset. And that's one of my favorite quotation. What is yours? Don't give up, follow your North Star, don't give up, live life on the edge. Oh, nice. Be honest in everything. No one is perfect. Oh, better than never. True will set you free. Oh, great. Clear eyes, 4 hearts, can't lose. Oh, live soul I love. Wow. Awesome. Okay. Then, okay, I think our time is almost up. Lastly, which of the 5 senses would you rather lose? Your sense of smell, your sense of sight? Which of those 5 senses? Your sense of taste, your hearing sense? Oh, losing hearing? Oh my God. Sense of touch. Oh, smell. Oh, okay. Okay, all right. So I hope you actually enjoyed this break. And so now we would have to move on to our next section of this workshop. Let's see. So let's move on to the next section of this workshop, which is going to be on writing the report or manuscript. So now, after you have learned all those stuff, what research, scientific research is about, how you initiate it, which database do you actually have to go to collect your information. Now, if you have been able to go through all this, that is great for you. Now, the next thing will be, how do you now put all those things together to write a report or manuscript, especially if you envisage publishing that for the public. You know, you would want to be a good contributor to our society, to our world, and that's why you might want to publish that. How do you do that? And there are several formats and steps in which you would have to follow. So with this, we are going to invite our first speaker for this section, and that's Dr. Joshua Young. Dr. Joshua Young is also a professor in the Department of Public Health here at Cal State Fullerton, and his research examined immigrant access to care, global health, governance, and tobacco control. His current projects examine compliance and enforcement of tobacco control policies, young adult substance use, and increasing diversity in clinical trials. I must also emphasize that Dr. Joshua is also one of my research collaborators. So Dr. Joshua, without wasting time, we welcome you. The platform belongs to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Mamudu. I will share my screen. I know that we're a little behind, so I will do my best also to maybe get us a little closer to being back on time. Dr. Mamudu, can you see my slides?
Yeah.
Great,
Yes.
Thank you so much. Oh, so my task for the next few minutes is to really help us to think about the ways in which we want to write the introduction portion of a manuscript or any other type of written product that might come out of a research endeavor, whatever that may look like. So I'm going to keep it relatively simple with the opportunity perhaps to ask questions if that is something that Dr. Mamudu would like. But I think the first thing we want to think about with respect to the introduction section is really, what are you trying to accomplish, right? What are you trying to do in your introduction section? I think what we'll hear later on in today's section is that, methods, you are laying out what you did, results, what you found. But before you get into all of that important information with respect to your study, you have this thing called the introduction section. And really what you want to do with your introduction section is to provide context for understanding both why the paper was written and how the information from the study is going to help improve our understanding about a particular phenomenon or add to what we already know. So we want to know, it helps us provide some background about the topic that you've done excuse my typo there, as well as with introduction. But you want to provide information on what we know about the topic on which you've done your research, and how the research that you have done will add to what we already know about the topic. So if we want to reduce it down to the two sort of main activities of what you want to achieve in your introduction, I'd say the first is to present what is known. No study exists in a vacuum. That is, every study is preceded by any number of related studies that have been done before it. And so what the introduction helps us do is to help the reader get a sense of what is already known about the topic. What can be tricky here is that you potentially may be writing for people who are very familiar with your topic and who know a lot of the background information. But you may also be writing for people who may not know very much at all, or who may not know anything at all about your topic. And so you want to consider the various audiences for whom you are providing this information. Now, all of the data and information that you have and that you've gathered in the literature review that you have been sort of provided some instruction on how to do earlier is going to go into this introduction. Now, I will say that the information that you find in your literature review, not all of it will make its way into your introduction. And I think one of the key things to remember is that your introduction really is a curation of the information that you found in your literature review based upon the purposes of your study, as well as any number of practical issues such as the page number or the word limit in the manuscript if you're submitting it to a journal, or the page count if you're submitting an assignment to a class. And so you really will probably have to narrow down your introduction a little bit and tailor it to the specific audience and in the particular format that you're writing for. So among the various factors that you need to consider in terms of writing your introduction and how much detail, some of it obviously is disciplinary. If you are writing in the social sciences like sociology or anthropology, your introduction will likely be much more comprehensive and detailed. You usually have a larger word count to go into your introduction, whereas perhaps in some of the medical and health sciences, the introduction will oftentimes be more compact in the way that you write. And so those are the kinds of things that you want to consider. One is discipline, the other is journal or page count for either the assignment or the journal that you want to publish in. And so you want to think about these things in terms of how comprehensively or how elaborative you're going to be in writing your introduction. So you want to present what is known, but the level of elaboration will depend on a number of different factors. The other thing besides having information and presenting it is being able to write in a way that is compelling. So it's not enough to simply have the information at hand. You want to both organize it and write it out, present it in a way that is both understandable, right? That is a matter of clarity, and compelling. And that is a matter of writing in a way that sort of clearly makes a case for your study being done and its rationale. So the information and the way you present it should flow clearly and logically. You want to make sure that all the information that you find is tied together around various subsections of an introduction. And once all is said and done in the presentation of your information in your introduction, you want to be able to help the reader understand the gap in information that is addressed by the study that you conducted, right? We want the reader to know not only what we know, but what we don't know and why this study was done. And that's the third bullet point here is you want to be able to help the reader understand the rationale for the study. Why was this study done? What is the gap in information that you are filling with this study? And so all of this ties into this question of being compelling in your introduction. So in the limited time we have, just a few tips for writing your introduction. You want to make sure that you not jump into the writing process too soon. You want to make sure that you spend sufficient time with the literature. And I know this sounds very basic, but you want to make sure that you think about what you've read, right? You don't want to just sort of throw everything together and sort of put it together haphazardly, but you really want to think about the literature, understand it, and understand the various contours of it. You want to perhaps think about getting some bibliographic software. There are all kinds. There's Mendeley that I think is free. There's EndNote that is popular in many places that often has to be paid for. But being able to use a citation software or a bibliographic software can be time consuming at the front end, but can also be very time saving as you progress through the writing of your manuscript. Make sure that you give yourself ample time and space to write and potentially rewrite your introduction, as well as the rest of your manuscript or paper, knowing that it's hard to get it right the first time. I think there are very few, if any, writers who can sort of sit and write, and the first thing that comes on the paper is exactly what gets published or sent into a class, right? So make sure that you give yourself time to write and to potentially rewrite a number of times. And I think something that can be very difficult and is oftentimes one of the purposes of a word limit or a page limit on a writing assignment or activity is to make sure that a person or the writer or authors, they get to the point, right? You want to try and eliminate the fluff in your writing. And it's difficult, right? Because you want to be comprehensive, but you also don't want to be overly wordy. And so that is an exercise in writing that is very challenging, that oftentimes only comes with practice, but it is something definitely to consider as you go through your introduction section. How do I make sure that the reader is getting a full view of the literature, but doing it in a way that is succinct and to the point? These are my sort of main overviews of this issue of writing an introduction. And I will hand it over now back to Dr. Mamudu.
Dr. Joshua, thank you very much for such an insightful and great presentation. So we now move on to the next speaker on the subject of writing the report or the manuscript. And this time we are looking at writing, after you are done with the introduction, the next step will be to put together your materials and methods section of the manuscript. So with that, we are going to invite Dr. Pem Basha Rasmid. Dr. Pem, forgive me if I'm not able to mention your name very well, but simply, yeah, please, can you tell us, can you mention it correctly for us? Sorry.
My name is Dr. Pimbusha. You call me Dr. Pim. My colleague call me Dr. Pim. My last name is Rasami Shantong. 16 letters. Better call me Dr. Pim. Thank you, Dr. Mabudu.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for saving my life. I've been thinking about this for so long time. Okay, so simply put, she is Dr. Pim. So Dr. Pim is an associate professor from the Department of Public Health here in Cal State Fullerton. Her expertise are in the areas of experimental and behavioral economics. Her research interest is to understand the impact of food labeling, food advertising on consumer decision, and effectiveness of public and trade policy intervention to improve health outcomes. So again, Dr. Pem is someone who is also I'm envisaging working with in research. She is a great personality. And so, Dr. Pem, we welcome you, and then the platform is yours. You have a 10-minute talk on materials and then the meta section of the manuscript. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mabudu. I'm gonna share the screen. I try to cover as much as possible on the method and materials section within 10 minutes. But if you want to know more, feel free to contact me after the workshop. So how can you see my my screen, my share screen, Dr. Mamudu and everyone?
Yes, but I think maybe you would have to select a different.
Oh, okay, let me try again.
Yeah.
Maybe I shared the wrong thing. Sorry about that. How about this?
Okay, yeah, there you go.
Okay, so they have like I use a presentation. So you might see my note a little bit because a lot of things I try to cover within 10 minutes. Anyways, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Pim. Today I'm going to talk about the method and material section in manuscript writing. So about this section, there has like a 4 or 5 step that you need to keep reminding yourself when you're writing this section. Remember that your method section serves 2 purposes. The one is helping readers understand your study, and the second one helped others to replicate it. So constantly provide enough information for full replication, even though a particular journal doesn't require it, but detailed methods are the key to a rigorous and transparent of your study. If you have a clear method, people have a sense that you have a legit and rigorous study. And imagine that your cell need to reproduce that study again in the future. You need to include some modification in or adjustment to for you to understand your study in the future. And consider a visual aid, for example, using a flow chart, using decision tree or checklist, make your method more clear and help readers to interpret your study easier. Okay. So the components in the method and material sections include study design, sample, measures, and analysis. For the study design, so what type of your study and the data materials used in your study. So the importance of method in the research paper is to provide the opportunity to judge the authenticity and reproducibility of your study, right? So it's 2 parts. You need to make sure that people who read your study be able to replicate your study. So we are going to talk about in detail on the study design in the next slide. First of all, you need to explain your study design. And thank you for Dr. McGillis that gave you an overview on the study design. So you need to explain what type of the study you use. So Lily, broadly speaking, there are two types of the study designs, descriptive or analytical study. For the descriptive study, it includes case reports, the case series, cross-sectional studies. So I'm not going to go in detail, but I just want to give you an overview on that, and then you can search on the database or something what the difference among this one, because we're going to spend more and more time to understand for each type of the study. Okay, for example, the cross-sectional study, right? So you observe one situation at one time, and then you try to find the association between two things at one time. You're not following up the participants. This is why it's cross-sectional study. It's very convenient, and most researchers has done this study. And another part is analytical design, divided into two types, observational and experimental. So observational, you observe it, you try to understand it. Okay, so design is transverse, where we take a specific sample at a specific time without any follow-up. So the design is very easy to conduct, cohort study, which is under the observational study, is an approach that follows, that allows the research to follow the participants over time. You observe their behaviors, you observe their change, their decision over the time. That's the cohort studies. And the last one, which is actually a huge thing, that's more in detail in the experimental designs. But the experimental design, briefly, that you have intervention and you want to conduct the experiment that see the effects of your intervention. Most of you will hear about have a control, have a treatment groups. So you want to see whether it's the difference in the outcome between the control and the treatment group. So this is kind of like an overview of the study design. You need to know your study design and explain it out. It could be anything here or maybe something like outside. So people would know like, what is your design in your study? So next is, okay. After you explain your study design, you describe the materials used in your study and explain how the material were prepared. So I will talk about in two different studies, the study that you use secondary data and the study that you use the primary data. For the study that you use as secondary data, meaning that you or your team do not collect the data by yourselves. You use the other research or government agency public data for your study. The primary data study is you and your team actually collect the data for your study. So talking about the secondary study first. So you need to identify the source of the data or materials that your study used. You use a survey, documents, letter, public available data, or restricted data. And then explain the data materials in greater detail, the process to obtain the data materials, the structure of the data materials, and how you organize the data and materials to answer your research questions. And also you need to include about the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So what the criteria you include in your study. For example, I'm interested in only women. So meaning that I exclude all male participants, and the women need to be 18 years old or above and have a certain specific criteria. That's kind of like inclusion criteria. Exclusion criteria, what you exclude. I exclude men because I'm focused in women health. This type of thing you need to explain into the data materials. And then speaking of the primary data study, so you collect your own data. So first thing you need to explain your design and your study tools, what tools you use, how you decide. If you use your survey, if you use a questionnaire for your experiment, explain the step, how you decide, or you use one-on-one interview, or you use a focus group, how you decide the questions of the focus group, what type of the questions in the one-on-one interview. And also similar to the secondary data study, you need to include the inclusion and exclusion criteria. If you do some type of quantitative analysis, you need to calculate the power to compute the sample size that's appropriate for your statistical analysis. And then if you desire to, you need to test reliability, availability of your study tools from the pilot testing. And if you collect the data, right, you need to explain about your data collection procedure, like what the sampling method you use, what the distribution method, what is the logistic. And then we go to the sample, the study sample. You need to explain about your study sample, like your sample characteristic, your sample size. You describe your sample, like if you do like experiment, right, or any secondary data, you explain like what is demographic characteristic of my sample in the study. If you're collecting the data, what is the response rate? If you follow up the participant, what is the retention rate if available? So this type of example, right, this is usually on the table 1, mostly in the manuscript, that explain or describe the sample characteristic. The sample characteristic can be divided by whatever that you think is appropriate to show in your manuscript. Mostly they show the socioeconomics of the participants, like age, gender, race, annual income, educations, and so on, right? And if you deal with the human subjects, a very sensitive issue, you need to get the IRB approval, and you have to have an ethical statement. Okay. And then we go to the third sections of this method, that is like a study measures. So what is your outcome variable? What is your dependent variable? Define your outcome variables. Explain the characteristic of your variable. Either your outcome variable is qualitative or quantitative. Detail the procedure to obtain your dependent variable. For example, one of my article, my outcome variable is nutritional quality index, right? So you need to explain how you come up and how you calculate nutrition quality index. If you need to use a formula in order to calculate nutritional quality index, you need to explain it. What is a formula? Would that you created your own formula, or you use like others' literatures to calculate your nutritional quality index? And the next one is your predictor or independent variable. So define your predictor or factors. What is the control? What is your treatment group? Explain the characteristic of your variables. Like same thing, whether your independent variable is qualitative or quantitative, and detail the procedure to obtain the independent variable. Either you group it, you categorize it, explain each group or each category. And the last one is list of covariate variables, like socio-demographic variables that you incorporate in your analysis. Okay. And the last section of the method is the study analysis, right? Depending on what type of your analysis, if you use a qualitative analysis or quantitative analysis. So for qualitative analysis, so there's different type of qualitative analysis. So you need to make sure that you your study use which analysis, and also the software or program that you use in the analysis for the qualitative one, like NVivo, Atlas, or something else, right? So, but my study is something about quantitative analysis, either the descriptive statistic or inferential statistic. If inferential statistic, you use a parametric statistic or non-parametric statistic. So you use t-test, f-test, ANOVA test, Pearson correlation test, or chi-square test. Explain it out which test you use to analyze your data in your study, and the software and program you use in the qualitative analysis. And the tip for writing a method that this is a tip that I always use as well, that the method section should be written in past tense, because you already conducted all the study before you present it in manuscript. And if you use some technique that previously used in other study, you do not have to explain everything in greater detail, but you can say as previously described and cite that study. And also, make sure that you provide enough information for another researcher that be able to replicate your study or your experiment. And the last two things that I still doing it at, search the peer-reviewed published articles that have the same study design as yours as example. So you have the idea what they put in it, what is order, and also follow the manuscript guidance of your target journal. And sorry about that, I a little bit like 2 minutes over. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me in this email or call me, or show up at my office at the Department of Public Health. Thank you.
Wow, that's a great presentation from Dr. Pim. Thank you very much for such an insightful and informative presentation about the materials and meta section of the manuscript, which is something as a researcher you have to place much emphasis on, because everyone have to know how you actually perform the research, and the material and meta section is actually the place you have to explicitly explain that. Thank you very much, Dr. Pim. So now we move on to our next speaker, who is actually will be giving us a talk on the results section. So after you have performed your analysis, now you have a result, you have an output, regardless of the software you actually use in performing your analysis. Now, once you have the output, how do you write out the output in terms of the results? So with that, we are going to invite Dr. Samson Akafo from the Department of Computer Science here in Cal State Fullerton. He is an assistant professor. And then his research interest is at the intersection of computer science and public health, including health informatics, contagion modeling, computational epidemiology, algorithms development, and optimization. His current focus is on developing machine learning models for predicting potential outbreak of specific disease in a location of interest, modeling and evaluating public health strategies and interventions for HIV and then TB, which is tuberculosis. So again, also he is also another person I've been working with on several different areas. So Dr. Samson, we welcome you to the platform, and now the platform is yours. You have 10 minutes to tell us on how the best way to actually write out the results section of our manuscript. Thank you very much. The platform is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud, and welcome everyone. I'm highly delighted to be here. So it seems we are running far behind the schedule, but I will try in the next few minutes to present how we can write an acceptable result for our manuscript. Let me share this. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right, so after discussing your methods and methodology and materials used, the next in the manuscript will be to write a concise result. It's usually the third section of the manuscript, but it depends on the journal you want to write or the conference you are submitting. Sometimes these conferences will present like a template for you to write. There may be a template for the journal. In some journals, it will be the fourth session. So it depends on the journal. But there are things in all of them, there are things that are common to all, that the result session involves a straightforward presentation of the outcomes or findings of your work. This will also depend on the type of research, case control, questionnaire presentation, interviews, focus group, or like if you are in the IT, computer science, it may involve developing programs, running an algorithm. So when you run your algorithm, what are the results? You present this. So it's expected to be presented in short sentences. Overly long sentences with so many interconnections will disrupt the meanings of the presentation. When someone is reading it, it might be difficult to grasp or understand the actual idea behind the presentation. So it is advisable to present your results in series of short sentences that are linked together. The flow or logical connection from the first sentence to the last one should be obvious, and it should be clear as well. There should be no vagueness in the statements you are presenting. We'll look at some examples later. And then results should be very informative. It should contain descriptive information about what you have done, the outcomes. Example is if you are developing an algorithm, you run the algorithm or for a particular problem, you should be able to state that in practical outcome, that the time complexity of this new algorithm is better compared with, although we discussed that at the discussion session, compared with what is in existence. If you're applying your algorithm or pseudocode to a real life situation, like moving items from a depot to affected regions in terms of emergency management. When you are trying to save life, you take pharmaceutical equipment or life-saving medications from the depot to the affected areas. How many hours, days did that take? You present this in the result. It should be structured. As I said, the logical connections from the first sentence is always a brief introduction of what to expect in the results session, and then followed by structured sentences. You can sometimes use tables, figures to complement the text. We also always look out for figures and tables, the text to present the more vividly the information from the results. So if you can, and if it makes the presentation easier to read, please use figures and tables. Remember that in this session, we are presenting the findings exactly as they are, not discussions. In the next session, we will discuss, there will be a session on discussion where you are expected to discuss your findings, compare with existing findings and the rest of them. But for this session, we always use past tense, mostly anyway, in some situations when you are presenting something that is already in existence or ongoing, you may use present tense, but mostly you write in past tense. And the table should be clear and easy to read. There are some points to be avoided to consider when writing the results session. You should try not to discuss or at that point interpret your result. Present it exactly as they are, and then the next session we'll discuss that. Avoid duplicating information between the text and the tables. The tables should complement what you have in the narrative. We'll look at examples where the tables will present information that is seen that are not present in the narrative. When you are describing the result in the narrative, you can refer the reader to table 1, table 2, mention the numerical number of the table, that more information about this, or as shown in table 2, this is this, something like that. So you present your results in tables and figures. If you're using figures, try to avoid too many colors. Grayscale or in black and white is usually preferred, unless when the colors are needed to further buttress the points in your results. And when you're doing this, consider to use the minimum necessary the colors instead of having too many colors. I mentioned earlier that you should avoid the long sentences. This is important. It disrupts the flow and the understanding of the results. Present them in many simple sentences. And I try to avoid providing data that is not critical to answering the research questions. In background or problem definitions, you have mentioned the specific research questions. So here, present straightforward outcomes from the research that is geared towards answering the research question. Remember that not all results will be needed in the results session. Only those findings that we have to prove your case or to help the reader understand further why the experiment was carried out, why the study or the research was done. In some instances, you may have negative results. It is okay to mention that this is a negative result, not too many of them, but if you have a negative result, mention that, and in the discussion session, present why there was a negative result. We assume that the negative result will not affect the possible conclusion of your research. So try not to report background information, something I've already reported, or attempt to explain the findings. As I said earlier on, explanation will come in the next session. That the first time we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Let's look at examples. So for these presentation, this paper, we'll look at the first one here. So the author said, tables 310 present the results of accuracy statistics for the logistic, linear, logarithmic, quadratic, and the rest of them respectively. So in each one, they use machine learning optimizers. And the table will have columns, one for logistic, linear, logarithmic, quadratic, and it will contain the country name, model used for each country. So the narrative is expected to help you understand the table. It is not a repetition of information in the table. This is further description of what you see in the table 310 on this paper using one of the 3 machine learning optimizers. This is another table where the results, another paper, an excerpt from another paper. So you have the study community. So here is about interviews, questionnaires. So this result is talking about the outcomes of the questionnaire, percentage of respondents in each category. And we'll have this paper on geoclustering model for optimizing locations during emergency operations. So here, the straightforward presentation, the coordinate of selected primary health centers were used, and the number of selected PHC will depend on the population of the area. So this is an introduction of what you will see in the table. Another paper on performance statistics. So here, the authors started with the figure number, fig 3, depicts the submitted predictions of the data-rich scenario, scenario 1. The corresponding figures for scenario 2 to 3 are provided in supplementary material. So depending on the length of the result session, some journals, some conferences will stipulate that the result session should not be, let's say, more than a page. So you can put other materials, other explanation in the supplementary session material, and then you describe briefly what to expect in the figure. So the person, the reader, will go to the tables or the figures to find out exactly what is happening. In some tables, you may need to.
Dr. Sampson, I think you have about 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. So this is another example of the paper. So this is the result stations there is just describing percentage of respondents. And if when needed, you can use 3D figures instead of 2Ds, and this helps to explain further. And yeah, so these are the references, and we are looking for undergraduate research students and some graduate as well. So if you are interested in some of our research activities, please check the website of our lab and send an email. We'll see, we'll get you over. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Sampson, for a great presentation on the results. So like he made mention of the results section, you just have to be straightforward, just write out the results as it is without making any too much emphasis on that. So thank you very much, Dr. Sampson, for presenting the results section of the manuscript. So now from the results section, the next step in the manuscript writing is a discussion. Just to echo what Dr. Sampson said, at this discussion level, we are going to elaborate more on from what you wrote for your results. So we are going to invite Dr. Faustin Williams, who is a Stedman tenure track investigator and National Institute of Health Distinguished Scholar and a trained transdisciplinary health disparities researcher. She is the head of the Immigrant Health and Health Disparities Research Lab, which focus on acculturation and social immigrant health, and that's acculturation and social determinants of immigrant health. Her previous research work actually focused primarily on determinants of cancer disparities across the continuum of cancer care, that is diagnosis, treatment, mortality, survivorship, and has various cutting-edge research approaches, including spatial network analysis, community-based system dynamics, to understand the underlying causes of cancer disparities. So again, Dr. Williams is actually my collaborator at National Institute of Health. So Dr. Williams, we welcome you to the platform to give us a 15 minutes presentation on a discussion section, which tends to be one of the denting section when you are writing a manuscript. So the platform is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's exciting to be here. And It's been a very fascinating discussion so far, and I'm proud to join this panel. I'm going to try to share my screen. So just bear with me for a moment. Okay. So we are way behind time. I'll try not to rush, but at the same time, I don't want to take too much time. So I will skip the introduction. Thank you again, Dr. Mahmoudou, for this introduction and for the invitation. I'm supposed to talk about the discussion session. And one thing I've noticed is that with some of my fellows, sometimes beginners of research paper tend to get confused about the result and also the discussion and conclusion. The question then is, what goes into the discussion? Is it the place where you interpret your result, or is it a place where you restate the importance of your findings? So in few minutes, we are going to, by the way, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So when you look at the anatomy or the pyramid of research.
Yes, you can.
Thank you all very much. When you look at the anatomy or the pyramid of research, you see that the discussion is almost at the tail end of the paper. But even though it is at the tail end, I'm going to say that it is, in my opinion, and I agree that some of my panel members will also agree with me, it is the most important part of the research paper. And it is the most difficult part also to write. So, and it's going to take, if it's taking you like a week to write your introduction, remember that the discussion session is going to take you twice the time to put it together. So why is the discussion session so important? It is very important because this is a place that you as a scientist or a researcher, you are demonstrating your ability to think critically. You are also demonstrating your ability to develop creative solutions to the problem that you propose in your word introduction. And lastly, this is the session that you formulate or you provide a deeper understanding of your finding. As mentioned by Dr. Akwafo just a few minutes ago, remember in the research session, you just state your result, but in the discussion, you are going to interpret what those results means. So what is the purpose and why is the discussion so important? One, you are interpreting your results of the study within the context of which the literature that you propose in the introduction based on what is known about the issue and also the gap. So it is very, very important. Remember, the goal here is to interpret your result or your findings and describe the significance of your findings in the light of what is already known based on the research question or hypothesis in your introduction, and explaining also the new insights about the problem that you have identified based on what? The finding or the result. Okay, so in writing the discussion too, it is very, very important to connect it back to the literature based on what in the introduction. Dr. Joshua was the one that mentioned that when you are writing the introduction, you conduct literature review, but not everything in the literature will go into the introduction. Some of the literatures that findings you get, you are going to use it to support the interpretation of your finding in the the discussion session. Okay, for example, let's say that in the introduction, I propose to examine differences in breast cancer screening habit by place of birth. Place of birth simply mean that between US born and foreign born, right? And my result shows that foreign born women in the US at higher risks of not receiving mammogram, or in other words, they have higher odds. The odd ratio is, for example, 1.63, and the confidence interval ranges between maybe 1.10 to 2.45. So this clearly show that the foreign-born women are at risk of not doing screening. Now you come to your interpretation. Remember, you don't repeat the results this way. You have to interpret it and describe it, what this means, in the sense that people who are not in your field, you have to explain it, that you explain it to your grandma at home who has never been to school, or an individual who is not in public health. I know most of the people on this call might be from public health background, but remember, public health starts on what? All aspects of life. So, and also writing a scientific paper, you are not only writing for people in your field of study. So you should be able to explain that result in a language that anybody at all can take that discussion, read it, and understand what truly you mean. So going back to my example, when it comes to the discussion, to interpret it or to explain it in my discussion, for example, I can say that compared to US-born women, foreign-born women are more likely to have not received breast cancer screening. That is what restating the result in past tense. But now, what does the literature say? So that's where that I go back and link it to my literature. Is my result in supportive of what already has been established in the literature? If that is it, go ahead and what? State it and cite those references. If your findings are contrary to whatever we already known about this screening among US-born and foreign-born, do not hesitate to make that, because these are new insights that people need to know, okay? So the structure, I want to move quickly to talk about the structure of writing the discussion session. Remember, I said this is going to take you a lot of time. It is the most important part of the whole research paper. So people suggest that your discussion should not be more than 4 paragraphs. But again, it depends on the kind of journal that you are targeting, the subject area, and also the research question and the consideration. But the most important thing is that make sure your result your discussion is clear in a language that everybody can read it and understand it. Okay, so the instruction, your content of your discussion, the first paragraph, go back and let the review the reader know that the reason or the objective of the study, restate the research problem or major finding in your first paragraph. Clearly, be very concise about that, okay? And 2, after you state it, 2, what is the meaning of the findings? Go back to your finding and state it and explain it systematically. After reading the discussion, you want your readers to think about the result, the take-home message. The question that the reader should be asking themselves is that, why haven't I thought about this? You don't want your readers reading your result and then going to and fro to the introduction to say, what did this person say they were going to do and what is the result? No, in the discussion, make sure that you are already interpreting the result that you've mentioned in the results session. This is not a place for you to also introduce what? New findings. You are only focusing on the most important thing that you want your readers to know about. The take-home message, that's what you should focus about, but you are relating it to what the literature has established about the problem, meaning the research problem, the hypothesis, and if it is inconsistent, it is your finding are consistent with the literature, state it. If it's in contrast, state it and explain it vividly. This is that's where the area that I call alternative explanation of your what. Or give an alternate explanation of your discussion. It is important to remember that the purpose of the research overall is to discover and not to prove. Therefore, when writing the discussion session, please, you should carefully consider all possible explanation for the result, rather than just those that fit your prior assumption or biases. Dr. Akafo just mentioned that it is always sometimes important to explain your non-hypothesis or negative result. That could be very important key finding based on your research question. So don't be afraid or don't skim away from what explaining or interpreting your what result in your what discussion session. And under the discussion session, so this is a session that you identify or acknowledge any limitation in your study. Then and point it out. Describe whether the result can be generable to the general population or not. It's very, very important to do this. And also under the discussion, this is also a place you talk about what any other future direction you want the research to go. But the key here is that if you are mentioning future direction in the discussion, when you go to the conclusion that the next speaker is going to be talking about, do not repeat that again, okay? So I know I'm like, due to time, I'm rushing to this, but my email is going to be on the live slide. Feel free to reach out to me for any question, and I'll be more than happy to answer any question in details, okay? But so in a nutshell, when writing the discussion, I want you to bear in mind this important thing. The discussion session is not a place where you are restating your result. Remember, the discussion session is a place for you to interpret and describe your finding. Should you need to remind your reader of the finding to be discussed, use brief terms, right? Brief sentences that relate the result to the interpretation. For example, you can say that the lack of available housing to single women with children in rural areas, for example, might be a problem. Why maybe foreign-born women are not doing screening. I don't know, but you could, if that's what you think it is, please feel free to state that boldly, okay? And also in terms of the recommendation for future study, as I already mentioned, it can be the last sentence of the discussion or at the conclusion. But the key here is that when you mention it in the discussion, do not repeat the same thing in the conclusion again. And then lastly, the use of first person sentences when writing the discussion sorry. The use of first person sentences in writing the discussion is as acceptable, but please do not use it too much, okay? First, do not use it too much, okay? To distract the readers from the key or take-home message that you want to them to be aware of. So like I said, again, remember this pyramid, the discussion is almost at the tail end of your scientific paper, but it is the most important part, and it's going to take you twice the time of writing the introduction to write your discussion, because again, you are interpreting and describing your findings, taking into account what we know in the literature and your interpretation of those findings. So again, I'm just repeating this, and the general rule I want to end with is that please do not use jargons. Please do not use jargon. The discussion place is not a place for you to scientific writing in general. It is not a place for you to show that you know vocabulary. Keep it simple. Okay, keep it simple. State your interpretation clearly in the context. Explain the result and make reference to past work. In the structure, start from the general to specific by restating the problem, describing the pattern based on the literature, whether they are in supportive of your work or not, and also you include limitation. So thank you all for listening.
Wow, thank you very much, Dr. William, for such a rigorous and insightful explanation of the discussion section of the manuscript. I think it was really helpful, yeah, and we've really learned a lot about how the best way to write a discussion section of a manuscript, which tends to be the most difficult and most important part of the manuscript. So the final section of the manuscript, the final but not the final, yeah, is the conclusion section, which is also another important piece of the manuscript you have to actually focus on. So with this, we are going to invite Dr. Sheena Charles, who is an associate professor in the Department of Public here at Cal State Fullerton, and a nationally organized expert in health policy, having established studies evaluating health insurance expansion impacts on health disparities, continuous insurance and access to care, a new conceptual framework redefining underinsurance. Dr. Charles led the State of Health Insurance in California project as a faculty associate in the UCLA Center for Health Policy Research, and also evaluate health insurance bills for the California legislature. She is currently working on a collection of case study entitled COVID-19 and American Federalism. That's how virus reveal who we are. So Dr. Sheena, we welcome you to the platform. You have 10 minutes to give us a talk on the conclusion part of the manuscript. Thank you very much. The platform is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Mamudu, and thank you to all the other speakers. This has really rekindled my passion for journal writing. So I hope that a lot of the students are feeling the same way. And I just want to throw open this invitation, not just myself as a public health professor, but I know other faculty members on here feel the same way, that if you are moved to write a journal article yourself, we would love to mentor you, and please reach out in the spring. There's also some great opportunities to present here on campus. Just throwing that out there. So I will share my screen now, and my slides are shorter. So we'll do it this way. Honestly, I usually do it this way for my classes too. When I find when I do slideshow, I can't figure out how to do the controls. So I'm just gonna kind of keep the other slides up here. And honestly, the conclusion slides are shorter because the conclusion is usually shorter. It's a final paragraph or two. Often you'll see in the journal rules itself, it will say that they want that final section to be combined with the discussion. So it sometimes doesn't even have its own heading, right? But another, honestly, this is actually my favorite section of any journal article. And I don't think Dr. Mahmoudou knew that when he asked me to talk about this section. I just saw, oh, he asked me to talk about this. That's great. Because I really care about how work is applied in the real world. As you could hear from my bio, I do work with the California legislature. I do work on case studies. I don't just write journal articles. So for me, thinking about, well, how can this study actually apply in the real world and move forward is kind of the most important question. And in fact, I've been put on many teams of researchers kind of just to write this section. So this really is my specialty, thinking about these aspects. So, why is there a conclusion? Why don't we just end with the wonderful discussion that Dr. Williams talked about, which is really focusing in on the results themselves and the interpretation of those findings, and of course, the very important limitation section. So what is this conclusion thing at the end? Well, the whole point of a conclusion is that it provides kind of a roadmap for the reader to be able to then take what you've given them, this study, this incredible amount of new information, and put it somewhere that makes sense in their own lives, that makes sense in their heads, right? Their framework that they're already operating from. So it emphasizes at the end, why does this study matter? And the whole kind of point of the conclusion is that you're saying, okay, reader, I'm talking to you through the article, reader, here's where you can take this and now go. Here's that path that goes ahead. So you can see I use this wonderful picture that a friend of mine posted on the internet. But it's to me, it's that kind of thought. You have all of these stars, all the data, this beautiful galaxy that you're seeing, but how do you actually shine that light to move it ahead? And if you do the conclusion well, your work will stand out in terms of people remembering it later. Sometimes they get very confused by numbers. Sometimes even the interpretations kind of blend together. But if you give them something that they can hold on to and say, this is why it's important, they will remember it and they will take that study with them. So what are the parts of a great conclusion? Really, there's 3 different ways you can do it. And I put the 2 different circles here on top because those are kind of interchangeable. And as Dr. Williams mentioned, sometimes the future research even gets mentioned in the discussion, right? So you can kind of make that your transition, if you will, if you'd like to do it that way. But that ending kicker at the bottom, that's your last sentence, maybe 2. But that ending kicker is really important, just in terms of trying to just wrap it up with a bow. So let's talk about these 2 other aspects first. And I'm going to start with future research since that was the where we ended, and it's a good transition. So you can answer these 2 questions. Think of this as your blueprint. How does your work answer these questions? So where can the field go, whatever field it is you're working in? It could be public health, it could be computer science, it could be honestly, any field at all. It could be researching black holes as they're doing here on campus. Very interesting stuff. But where can that field go now that you've done this study? And the second question also gives people something to really hold on to. Is this something that is totally planned? It's not anything that's funded yet. It's not even, you're just kind of thinking, spitballing, thinking out loud, or is this work already actually happening? And I think people are excited sometimes when they find out, okay, my work can put you, onto this other path. And it turns out that there's another professor that's doing this, or there's another research team, or my research team is planning on doing it in the next stage of our study, which you'll often see. And so that kind of thing kind of lets the reader know where this fits in on the timeline. Okay, and then let's go to societal context here. And by societal context, for my work and for me, that usually relates to policy. Obviously, you heard in the introduction, especially when we're talking health insurance, there's so much happening in public policy. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I mean, it could be public policy, but really we're just talking about how people live in society and where that fits in. And so even if you're doing something that's very straight technical, somebody is going to use this somewhere to understand something better. And some segment of society will hopefully benefit from what we're doing, because that's the whole point of academic research, is to, even if it's illuminating understanding in some area that's new or different. So why does it matter to the broader society? And if there is something that is actually changing in society related to what you're doing, Is this a new technological advance that might revolutionize something? Is this a new idea that might change how people interact with each other? Any of those kind of changes that you can link your work to in this conclusion are going to help the reader remember it. You want to link to a framework that they already have. Thinking about, how they live, where they live, why they're living in this way. That's the societal context you would like to relate it to. And then the final kicker here is where your writing skills really come into play. It's not a matter of impressing them with your brilliance of, wow, you came up with this great new study, because you already did that in the introduction and the discussion, all of those other things. What you want to do, though, is try and tap into those English skills that you learned in English, I think it's 301, but tap into those writing skills and think about constructing this sentence almost as a final headline so that it'll stick in their heads. And so when I say a literary device, I mean literally going back to your English classes where they talked about things like alliteration and those kind of things, dissonance, consonants, those kind of things can help. So alliteration, to remind folks, is repeating the first syllable, sound, or letter at the beginning of the sentences. So even if you say something like, the societal significance of this study, people will remember that. And you can edit it by reading it out loud to yourself. And if you do that, your ear will hear it. And if it's something that sounds good to you as you're speaking, then other people will also remember it. So if you can come up with some kind of phrase that is memorable in that, it will really help. I do want to also point out here, there is one literary device that you should not use, which is called hyperbole. And hyperbole is when you really overstate things, like this is 1,000,000 times better than something else. Don't do that one. This is a scientific article. You want to avoid something that's considered, there's another phrase for purple prose. You don't want to go overboard, right? You don't want to say this will revolutionize the world as we know it. Avoid hyperbole. That's not a good literary device. You just want something that helps the reader kind of really latch on to what you're talking about. So I just wanted to leave you with this thought, because I like to put it in my presentations, and I think it's really important, especially now that I'm talking about the end of the staircase, right? We're talking about the conclusion where you've climbed all the way up. And this might seem like a daunting task, but as Martin Luther King Jr. said, you don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take that first step. If you're interested in doing these kind of studies, if you're interested in writing this, start wherever that first step is for you. Honestly, for me, sometimes I write my methods first, because that's the kind of thing that I'm working on as I'm doing the study. My literature review goes into that introduction, but I've already done it, but I'll work on that later. So you don't have to do these things in order, but you can take it a bite at a time. And that's the way that you'll get up that whole staircase. And here is my contact information here on campus. I love working with students, and I would be happy to talk with you if you would like to talk with me about any of these issues or about any work that you're thinking about doing. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you very much, Dr. Shana. We really appreciate this, very insightful, and you've actually concluded it in a very superb way. Yeah, so thank you very much for such a rigorous and insightful presentation on the conclusion section of the manuscript. Now, if you remember, I said it is the last but not the last, right? So now we have to get to the last part of the manuscript. Usually it's said to be the last, but whenever you are looking at a research article, you see it first. Then you said, why is it positioned at the first, but it's actually said to be the last by most researchers. So now with that, we are going to invite Dr. Masoom Mohammed, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Applied Data Science at San Jose State University. His research interests span deep learning and AI applications in both health informatics and cybersecurity. He has been published extensively as an author and co-author of over 20 papers in competitive peer review journal and conferences. He received his PhD in analytics and data science from Kansas State University. So Dr. Masoom, we welcome you to the platform, and then the platform is yours. Thank you very much for being present.
Hello,
Yeah,
can you hear me
yeah,
and see my screen?
yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Mahmoodou, for the invitation for this wonderful workshop, and also want to thank for the collaboration among the CSU systems and with the NIH. And I also want to thank all the previous speakers who actually gave very insightful presentation regarding like each section of a manuscript. So today I'll be talking about mainly abstract. So before talking about the abstract, I want to talk about the reader's mentality, right? So whenever, yeah.
Can you check your screen sharing? I think.
What happened?
Maybe you are using two screens, so you might have shared the screen which does not display the full screen.
Okay, let me check with the. Now is it good?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So as I was talking, like before going into the abstract, just try to think from the reader's point of view. So whenever we want to read any paper, we search some key terms, right? So in that case, the first thing we see is the title. And if the title is interested, then we glance to the abstract. And then the dedicated reader will examine the contents of the paper, and only the readers with a very specific interest in the subject and a need to understand it thoroughly, they will read the entire paper. All right. So that means the reader, from the reader's point of view, if you think the abstract is the best part of the paper, and it is most frequently read part of an article after the title. So there is various different kind of usage of abstract. Is one of these that it is only part of the paper that the readers see when they search through electronic databases. Like any databases you go, you search your key terms, you see the title and the abstract. And also from the journal or conferences editor's point of view, they use this abstract and the title to assign reviewers. So those who have the opportunity to review some papers, we know that we get only the title and the abstract, and based on this, we take the decision whether we can, whether we reject or accept the invitation, right? So there are other usage like indexing the paper, and also how we can retrieve similar kind of other manuscripts or articles. And there is another interesting usage of abstract is that abstract generally also used by translation services for foreign readers as well. So before going into the definition of abstract, there are different kind of abstracts. One is descriptive, which is generally very short, maybe around 100 words in length, which indicates the type of information found in the paper by including keywords, and it may include a purpose, objective, and method. However, it does not include results and conclusions. The another and most popular type of abstract is informative abstract, which I will be discussing more in this presentation, that which is common for conferences and journal papers, and which actually summarize all parts of the paper, which actually was discussed by different presenters today, which also includes the results and conclusion as well. generally, when you write a paper, we plan to submit at conferences, at journals. So before we start writing the abstract, one of the disposition is that try to get to know whether there is any guidelines from your college or your school or from the conference or the journals, right? Try to check whether there is a minimum or maximum length and check whether they require a structured abstract or not. So there is an example of a structured abstract. You see here introduction, objectives, methods, results, and conclusions. All should be like separated. So the another style is like unstructured, which is like also very common and popular as well, where you actually write all the structured thing in one paragraph. And also check for formatting requirements as well, because in different conferences or different journals, they require different kind of formatting styles. So what is abstract? So as we are researcher, we know what is abstract, and simply we can tell that abstract is the concise summary of the research project that we are doing so long time, right? And we should only summarize all the key components of the study. Think about this like a abstract. Your paper can be 20 pages long, right? Even if you want to summarize, you may write 1 to 2 pages. But for an abstract, you should only take or only include the most important part or summary of your whole paper. Simply put, we want to keep it short, simple, and at the same time, we do not want to waste the reader's time, while also presenting everything we want to convey through our research. And another very important aspect about the abstract is that it should be standalone. What does it mean? That it should be complete and internally consistent, meaning that if a reader read it, so that he or she can get the overall idea of your paper and he doesn't need to read other sections, right? So it should be standalone, and there should not be any reference. Abstract should not contain any tables or figures. It should not contain any abbreviations. But if necessary, some cases you can include as less as possible abbreviations, and it must be defined. And the conclusions of the abstract should be based on the data or the information we presented in the initial part of the abstract. Because if we take conclusion from other sections, this abstract will not be standalone, right? And this is also very common that practice we take like copy paste from other sections and just include it in the abstract. So do not do this. So these are the kind of don'ts of abstract. So what should the content of abstract? To write the content or to design the abstract, the abstract should answer these 4 questions. One is, why did we conduct the study? Another one is, how did we conduct this study? What did we find? And finally, why it is important. So why did we conduct this study? Meaning that what is the background of our study, or what is the scope of our study? What is the motivation? Maybe what is the motivation behind this study? Or maybe in some cases, is there any specific question that we are researching, or any specific hypothesis we want to address? So all of these, it should be in between 1 or 2 sentences, right? And if you think this is actually your introduction of the paper, which the previous speaker like discussed. And then the next thing is, how did we conduct this study? This is actually your methods and material section. Here you may have like your methods may be very long or very short, but the thing is here just discuss it from the high level point of view. We do not want to know the nitty-gritty of the methods unless this is the method-based paper. In that case, you can add little bit more explanation of your method. Then the next one is the when describing your results and you try to elaborate what you get in your result section, and also focus on the main findings. From your analysis, you may end up of getting maybe 10 important findings. And from these 10 important findings, all of those findings are not like same rank, right? So in the abstract, try to include the most important findings from your research, maybe one or maybe two, which from your field, you can gauge that, okay, this is the most important and at the same time, maybe most surprising to readers as well as the researcher from your scientific community. So try to include 1, 2, or 3, but this is the most important findings from your research. Then why it is important is it should include your discussion and its conclusion section. What is the broader implication of your study? What is new and innovative about your findings? How the findings may affect the field of the study? And is there any applications? And be very specific. Don't just make or take any generalized comments without backing up with your data or with your finding within the paper, right? So this should be the content. And then one thing I wanted to mention that writing a good abstract is not an art, but a learned skill. So it's not something like that. Someone is very good in English literature, maybe, and he come and write abstract, and it couldn't be effective, right? So this is all about how you practice yourself. So practice. And also there is an interesting exercise like those who are students or a new writer, they can perform themselves that you can pick any research article. The first thing you do, cover the abstract, okay? Then read the whole article yourself and write an abstract based on your reading. And then compare the ground truth, that means the author's abstract with you. So if you feel confident, you can stop there, or if you are not, then you write a couple of times and then check your abstract with the author's abstract. And if you feel confident, just stop there. So finally, after writing the abstracts, the another suggestion is that revise, and revise early and often, and delete all extraneous words. So like if anything extra, just delete it, and use very meaningful and powerful words. And finally, again, abstract should be clear, concise, and complete. So that's all from me. Thank you again, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Masoom. That's a great presentation and very insightful. So our audience, again, we apologize for going over time, but bear with us, and all the speakers have given us a very insightful and important information to carry along. So now we are at the last section of this workshop, which is going to be the question and answer section of the workshop. So all our speakers are now available, and then they will be willing to answer any questions you have about all the presentations you've actually listened. So you may put your question in the chat box, and then we'll be willing to answer. You may ask a specific speaker a question, or it could be a general question in which our speakers, any of them, can pick it up and then give you the answer on that. So any question from our audience? And then whilst we wait to answer questions, please, you are going to see a survey link in the chat box. So we will appreciate if you actually go in and then take the survey, which is, okay, I think Afiz want to ask a question. Okay, go ahead, Afiz. You can unmute yourself. Okay.
Also a question in the chat.
Or you can put your question in the chat.
Oh, good evening. Hello, can I be heard?
Yeah.
Hello, good evening. And I said thank you very much for those beautiful presentations. My question is, how do we address the seemingly reproducibility crisis in research? I don't know if you have any guidance in that respect. That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Afiz. So please, speakers, any of you, he is asking how do we address some of the difficulties or challenges in research?
Can he be more specific? This is a very broad question. Can he be elaborate on the question a little bit as to exactly what kind of difficulties he's talking about?
Yeah, Afiz.
Okay. Yes. I work in public health, and across board, sometimes when a researcher comes with some findings from their studies, when you try to replicate the same methodology across board, you are not able to come to the same conclusion. And this is actually a broader problem generally. In terms of, I've read some articles from some of the journals talking about a crisis of reproducibility in the world in terms of research. The question is, how do we address this issue of reproducibility? How do we make it easier for other researchers to replicate findings from other researchers' early efforts? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I guess he's asking about the general challenges in terms of research. Dr. Ashina, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's two of us, I think, that will respond. So he was asking about reproducibility. And so
Yes.
I think there's a few things to consider in this. And I agree that there are issues, and it's terms of, we have to look at data sharing. How are we sharing these data? And in addition to that, we need to share in terms of how do we actually collect these studies? And unless they're really not identical, but we have to look at the sample size, the study design. How was it done? What were the instruments that were used for data collection? Was it questionnaire? Was it biomarkers? So if we're able to really have similar methodologies in these studies, then we can replicate it, probably not to the exact p-value or relative risk or odds ratio or confidence interval, but there are opportunities to replicate it. But on the other hand, I think what's also important to remember is that it's fantastic to have different studies, because it's only when we do these studies multiple times and even hundreds of times can we actually really make any sort of conclusion about an exposure and an outcome. So for example, the question of smoking and lung cancer, we had hundreds of studies. We had hundreds of animal model studies. We had hundreds of population-based studies. And only after we replicated these studies and the studies were providing more or less the same conclusion that yes, there is an association between the two, that it is a causal link, that we actually prove that it's a causal link. So I think, yeah, it's about the sharing, but it's also important to sharing the data, sharing the data collection, and the design. But then it's also important to know that it's good to have additional studies and replicate them.
Yeah, so we also have Nyaba William also want to ask a question. So Nyaba William, go ahead, please.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful. My question is, apart from Google Scholar, which other site can we get relevant information to write our research?
Okay, thank you. So I think that was actually presented in the first section, the third subsection of this workshop. But however, I'll ask my speakers if any of them would want to pick up on that. Apart from, he said, apart from Google Scholar, is there any sites you feel is very relevant to searching for data base or information?
Oh, so, okay. Do you know PubMed? PubMed. Okay, for literature, right? PubMed. Where is? Can you hear me? There is PubMed.
Yes,
there is Medline. Yes. And sometimes too, depending upon the research area and the topic, you can set journal specific, like Science Direct, Science Direct, ResearchGate. But PubMed is the most comprehensive area that has all the biomedical literature story or data repository, Medline, and stuff like that. I would not say, let me say this, do not put all your eggs into Google Scholar alone. Google Scholar is not the most comprehensive database. The most comprehensive database is PubMed, Medline, and other journal specific like Science Direct. I always start with my literature set, and if I have my research term, the research question, I use Google Scholar as the first step, just to have a quick idea about what is out there. Then based on whatever I find, I go to the authoritative places like PubMed, Medline, Science Direct, and other specific databases. Let the library be your friend. If you are affiliated with the university, go to the library. They will tell you the tons and tons of databases that are available.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. There's also another question which is asking for what tense is considered appreciate in writing abstract. So it's asking for the tense, maybe the tense, the past tense or present tense, I guess, that you should actually use in writing the abstract.
Do you want me to take it, or the person who did the abstract presentation is going to talk on it?
I think you can go ahead and take it. Yeah.
Okay. So the intro, you are basically stating what is out there, and state like the intro, most of the journals like Public Health and Biomedical, they will just ask you for the background. They are not even ask you about a detailed information. So you just say that if there is a limited, for example, the study I was describing is the differences in the aim of this study is to evaluate the differences in breast cancer screening by nativity. So if the research is still going and not thoroughly complete, it's just like what I would call a preliminary study, sometimes IU is. But if the research is completely done, you can use WAS as your for your objective. In writing the result you are already done with analysis. So that is always done in the past sentence. And even the method, you've already conducted the method and started, so you can write it in past sentence. For the findings and the conclusion, when you are kind of interpreting, like briefly stating your major finding, is all going to be in the past sentence. And then the some journals will have discussion and conclusion. Some journal will only have what the objective, materials and method, result, and conclusion. The conclusion should always be in the future or something like that.
Thank you very much, Dr. William. So we will take one last question, which states that collecting data from database is not considered as plagiarism. So he's asking whether if you collect data from a given database, is that not considered as a plagiarism?
I don't understand what he meant by, oh, somebody
I
else is
think
there.
Dr. Ashina
Okay.
wanted to add something.
Oh, yeah, there's one question on whether the abstract, what tense should the abstract be in? And the abstract should be in past tense. Generally, it's in past tense. So that was a question. There's another question on whether third-year students at CSUF can participate in research via UROC, and certainly, yes. Third-year students are welcome. We're going to have a couple of different calls coming out for research. It's the SURE summer program, and also UROC can help be kind of the middle person to find a research project as well. So just wanted to answer some of those questions. And and if the question is about collecting data or utilizing data from existing data set, if you have permissions, one, if it's openly available, then it's perfectly fine. It's openly available. For example, we use NHANES data quite a bit in our research. So, and other people use the BRFFS, the behavioral data, and the CDC has a lot of data that's out there that's publicly available. So that's perfectly fine to use. If it's data that's collected through a study, a cohort study, and you would have to ask for permissions for those PIs. But now, and I always tell this to my students, and it's pretty incredible how much data there is out there for us. I remember when I was going to graduate school, everyone was so protective about their data that it was not freely available. But now there's so much freely available data that you could utilize it for your research questions. And as I said, we've done that before as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think with that, we will bring this wonderful workshop, an outstanding workshop to an end. And we thank all our audience, our participants for showing up. And hopefully we will see you in a future workshop. Please consider taking a survey you can just use your phone to scan from the screen using the barcode to be able to participate in the survey. Any feedback from you, any comment from you is really appreciated, and that should be able to guide us to prepare for a future workshop like this, which is fantastic. And again, thank you very much, our speakers, for such an awesome presentations and information shared with undergraduate, graduate researchers, and then all individuals alike. We really appreciate the time you spend in putting your materials together and then presenting it to the public. We thank you very much. I know a lot of people are even reaching out elsewhere in different countries, and they will really appreciate having the opportunity to attend a workshop like this without paying for it and still learning so much from it. So we really appreciate whatever you put in as speakers, and we thank you very much. So now we will bring the workshop into a successful end. And if you are a speaker, you want to say something, please, the platform, I can give you the platform. You can go ahead, and if you have any announcement, anything to give to your audience, please, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoodou, for organizing it, and it's been a pleasure collaborating with you on this workshop.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your collaboration, and hopefully we can even more is to come in the future. Yeah. Okay. All right. So thanks everyone, and then see you in the future for another workshop. Bye-bye.